It was a moonlit night, the kind that blanket the world in both beauty and danger. A soft breeze whispered through the fields, rustling the corn stalks that stood tall under the soft glow of the stars. But even in the tranquil sweep of the countryside, shadows can creep in, cloaked in intentions darker than the night itself. As the clock ticked past midnight, two figures slipped through the perfectly aligned rows of crops, careful not to leave a trace. The first was tall and broad, a presence that spoke of strength and menace. The second was shorter and wiry, moving quickly, eyes darting around like a feral animal aware of its surroundings. These were menacing robbers, desperate and reckless, looking to make a quick profit off the unsuspecting farmer who had poured his life into the land. But what they didn't know was that the farmer had been ready for them. He wasn't just a man, he was a guardian of his hard-earned home. With rugged hands and a heart full of resolve, he could sense the shifting air of disturbance even before the thieves stepped foot on his property. Earlier that evening, the farmer had sat at his kitchen table, grainy wood worn from decades of use. The sound of crickets played in harmony with the muffled hum of the radio, an old country song filling the space like a blanket. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring its warmth, when he felt that familiar tingle run down his spine, a signal that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He pushed back the chair, his boots scraping against the floor, and walked to the window. Outside, the farm was alive with shadows stretching long under the moonlight. He gazed at the sprawling fields, his pride and joy, yet a feeling of unease gnawed at him. He had heard the chatter among neighbors about men lurking at night, looking for easy targets. So he made a choice. He grabbed his old but faithful rifle, the one his father had handed down to him with stories of courage and protection. This wasn't about violence. It was about safeguarding everything he cherished. The rough wooden stock felt reassuring in his hands. He loaded it carefully, each bullet a promise to protect his land. Back in those fields, the robbers felt a rush of adrenaline. "We'll be out of here in no time," the tall one grinned, glancing at the plowed earth. The wiry one nodded, his eyes gleaming with greed as they approached the old barn, its weather-worn paint peeling like dried-up memories. They thought of all the tools, the machinery, and the harvest stored away, valuable treasures for a quick sale. But little did they know, the farmer had anticipated this very moment. The barn stood silent as the night, shadows dancing against the walls as the two intruders crept closer. Inside, the farmer waited, concealed in the darkness, perched like a hawk watching its prey. Heart pounding, a plan etched in his mind like the first rays of dawn breaking after a long night. As the robbers opened the door to the barn, it creaked like an ancient voice warning them of impending doom. They stepped inside, unaware that they were walking into a trap. The air inside was musty, filled with the scents of hay and machinery, remnants of a life spent toiling on hardworking soil. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. Shock shot through the taller one. But it was too late. Before they could react, the farmer turned on a battery-operated lantern, illuminating the barn and revealing himself as a fierce storm brewing within. He asked, a steely resolve in his voice that echoed against the wooden walls. The light flickered, casting shadows across his rugged face, showing every line etched by years of honest labor. Eyes wide, the robbers found their courage faltering. No longer was this a place of easy steal. Now they stood face to face with the embodiment of the land's spirit. "Let's get out of here," the taller one stammered, stepping back, but it was too late. The doorway was blocked and there was no escape. The farmer stepped forward, no longer just a man, but a force fueled by the memories of his hard work, his children's laughter ringing in his ears. Every seed he had ever planted now swirled around him like a mighty cyclone. "This is my home." Tension thickened the air. The wiry one, desperate and panicking, reached into his pocket for a knife, proving that fear can drive people to desperate measures. "You don't want to do this," he spat, though his voice quivered with uncertainty. But the farmer stood resolute. The weight of his words seemed to resonate, sending a fresh shiver down the spines of those who dared to challenge him. The farmer's years of hard labor allowed him to draw strength from somewhere deep, a well of integrity and grit that told him everything would be okay. He took another step closer, the barrel of his rifle steady as he eyed the blade in the thief's trembling hand. "Put it down," he commanded, voice unwavering. In that moment, he wasn't just defending his property, he was defending a legacy, a testament of his life spent nurturing the very land they sought to rob. Desperation flashed across the robbers' faces as they glanced at each other, weighing their odds. "We didn't mean any harm," the tall one pleaded, attempts at persuasion faltering under the weight of the farmer's gaze. The farmer shook his head. "You've stepped onto my land with ill intent." Real examples have shown that when a person's foundation is threatened, instincts sharpen. The very idea of losing something dear can unleash a hidden courage. This was one of those moments. The farmer embodied that courage. With a quick motion, he positioned the rifle closer, the barrel trained firmly on the knife-wielding thief. "Grab your partner and get out of here." In a heartbeat, the dynamic shifted. The robbers, now a tangled mix of fear and astonishment, glanced at each other one last time, realizing there was no way forward but the way out. They dropped the knife, the sound of it hitting the barn floor echoing like a surrender. Together, they bolted for the door, fear propelling them through the barn like startled deer. The farmer allowed them to flee, heart pounding but steady, a signal to the world that there was strength in protecting what's rightfully yours. As the night wrapped around them, they dashed into the darkness, each step a reminder of their misjudgment. Outside, the world felt different. The calm of the endless fields consumed the sounds of their hurried footsteps. Freedom felt fleeting, haunting as reality hit them. What they had tried to take wasn't just property, it was a lifeline. And there stood the farmer, unwavering against an intimidating tide, the moon casting shadows at his feet. The moment became ingrained in his heart like an unshakable image. The barn doors swung slowly in the night air, and he breathed deeply, for he knew he had not just defended his home, but also asserted his identity. In days to come, he would share this story around the hearth, his children wide-eyed as they absorbed the bravery of their father. Each retelling would be woven into his legacy, a whisper through generations about standing firm when the world tries to invade. As dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, it marked not just the end of a night of danger, but the beginning of a deeper understanding. The knowledge that courage often arises from the simplest of places, love for home and those we hold dear. Those robbers would forever remain a part of his story, but not the champions of his life. The true heroes are those who face the darkness with sheer willpower, knowing that from deep within the soil grows the strength to rise against any storm. The farmer walked back inside, the light from the lantern flickering softly behind him, a beacon of hope against the quiet despair of the night. The night was thick, as if the sky had poured all of its inky darkness over the farmland. Cows stirred restlessly in their pens, and the wind carried the faintest of sounds, the soft rustling of corn, a distant hoot of an owl, and something else, something sinister. In the moonlight, two figures crept along the perimeter of the farmer's fields, their silhouettes blending with the shadows. The first was a tall man, strong and confident, a self-assured swagger in his step. The second was shorter, nimbler, eyes darting around in paranoid anticipation. They whispered to each other, letting the dark blanket of night fuel their reckless courage. "Just a few tools," the tall one said, his voice low and eager. The wiry one nodded, glancing back at the fading outline of their getaway car parked unseen on the gravel road. This was an easy score, or so they thought. What they didn't realize was that the farmer wasn't the weak old man they expected. He was ready, his instincts honed by years of sweating under the sun and toiling for everything he owned. Inside the house, the farmer sat at the kitchen table, the faint flicker of a lamp casting soft shadows around him. His hands, worn and calloused, cradled a steaming cup of coffee, but he couldn't enjoy it. A lingering feeling nagged at him, a sense of foreboding that wrapped around him like a cold chill. He had heard whispers from neighbors about strangers lurking in the area, men who saw hard work as an opportunity for theft. He pushed the coffee away, standing up with purpose. As he moved to the window, the serene landscape looked deceptively peaceful. Moonlight bathed the rows of corn, but he sensed something amiss. His gut twisted as he peered into the distance, catching a glimpse of movement, those dark figures creeping ever closer. His heart raced, not with panic but with determination. He picked up an old rifle that hung over the fireplace, its years of use evident from the scrapes and scratches. It had been passed down through generations, a symbol of protection and resilience. He loaded it carefully, feeling the weight of the action grounding him in the present. Just as he secured the last bullet, a crash echoed from the barnwood splintering, the unmistakable sound of the intruders forcing their way inside. The farmer's heart thundered in his chest. They had entered his sanctuary, and with it, they had crossed a line. Rushing to the door, he took one last breath to steady himself. He moved quietly, muscles taut with resolve. The lantern on the wall flickered slightly, illuminating his path as he stepped outside into the charged night. Each step felt like a battle drum echoing in the stillness. He was ready to defend what was his. The intruders were digging through his things, their swipes careless, thinking they weren't just robbing a man but stealing from an entire life. The tall one grinned, holding up a prized set of tools, the very instruments the farmer had used to cultivate his dreams. "Look at this," he boasted, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside the barn. But the farmer was close now, shadows enveloping him as he waited for the right moment. He could hear their laughter, their confidence like a poison slowly curling through the air. He raised the rifle, mastery over fear and desperation fueling his stance. It was not his first time facing uncertainty. He had wrestled storms, droughts, and now, these men challenging his very livelihood. With a deep breath, he pushed the barn door open, allowing the creak to reverberate like thunder. The sudden sound froze the robbers in their tracks. The lantern's rays illuminated his determined figure, casting his shadow tall and fierce, a warrior ready for battle. "Get away from my things," the farmer's voice rang out, clear and unyielding. It sent a wave of surprise coursing through the two men. Their arrogance faltered, eyes wide with disbelief, as they turned to face the source of the authority they hadn't anticipated. "Listen, old man," the tall robber smirked, feigning bravado as he stepped forward. "We don't want any." The farmer didn't wait for him to finish. "You stepped onto my land." His voice was like molten steel, unwavering and fierce across the empty space. The wiry robber trembled slightly, glancing at the heavier one for reassurance. They hadn't expected a fight. They had envisioned an easy haul. It was in moments like these that desperation often morphs into reckless decision-making. The wiry one hesitated, but the taller thief couldn't stand down. "Yeah." He laughed nervously but took a step back, sensing the rising tension. In his hand was a tiny flicker of steel, a knife, innocent-looking but lethal in the grip of desperation. Without breaking a sweat, the farmer leveled his rifle, the cold steel pointing firmly toward the ground. "This isn't a game. You think that blade can intimidate me?" Every word he spoke was soaked in truth and experience, weighing heavily like a storm cloud ready to burst. In that moment, the farmer wasn't just a defender of crops. He was a guardian of his entire history. A rustle from outside broke the stillness, the sound of the wind holding its breath as both men realized they had gambled wrong. The wiry robber's fear became contagious, and he started instinctively backing away. "We didn't mean any harm." The tall robber's bravado crumbled under the weight of reality. "We can work this out," he cried, desperation flooding his voice. But their words hung in the air, powerless against the raw determination radiating from the farmer. The farmer took a step forward, unwavering. "It's too late for negotiations." In the battle of confidence between the valiant farmer and the frightened robbers, fear became a powerful tool against the misguided aggressors. They knew they had overstepped. The danger was real. With quick determination, the wiry one turned to the door, retreating back into the shadows, dragging his partner along with him. The tall one was still dithering, eyeing the tools one last time, but the urgency of their escape weighed heavily on him. He barked, and together they bounded toward the exit, racing against the fear that prickled down their spines. They fled the barn, hearts pounding like drums, aware that the night's darkness didn't take kindly to their greed. The farmer stood resolute, rifle steady, his gaze never leaving them. "Never come back," he warned, voice spreading its powerful essence like morning sunlight breaking the horizon. He watched as they disappeared into the night, two thieves swallowed whole by their own confusion. As the moon climbed higher, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. This land was his, shaped by years of blood, sweat, and tears. He took in a slow breath, muscles easing as relief settled over him. But he knew the world outside remained unpredictable. The whispers of danger would return. From that night forward, he reinforced the perimeter of his home, laying stones, building fences, and planting vigilant trees. He refused to be a victim. He would always be a protector. Every night thereafter, he would watch the horizon, vigilant but calm. The farm was a living entity, a sacred history standing firm against the trials of time, just like him. Neighbors would come to appreciate the story of what happened that fateful night, recounting it under the warmth of summer skies, sharing tales of courage that transformed fears into legends. The farmer became a symbol, not just for his family, but for the community who saw strength in his resolve. In the quiet of the night, the world would learn that those who stand for what is right cannot be broken. And beneath the stars and sheltering moon, the essence of determination grew stronger, rooted deeply in the very soil the farmer had tended to all his life. He was more than just a man. He became a legacy of courage and ambition, a story woven into the fabric of the night, forever ready to stand against the shadows that dared to encroach. Midnight hung over the farmland. A silvery moon cast a glow that danced over fields, but not all was peaceful under its watchful eye. Somewhere deep in the heart of the land, two shadows crept stealthily towards a farmhouse, their intentions cloaked in darkness. "Can you believe this place? It looks abandoned," whispered the taller of the two, his voice barely audible, scratched with anticipation. "Just keep moving. We're here for the tools. They're worth a lot," the shorter one replied, scanning the surroundings like a cornered animal, nerves racing. They moved with a mix of excitement and fear, each step closer to the farmhouse fueling their adrenaline. But what they didn't know was that the farmer was already awake, an old hand at understanding the rhythm of the night. He had sensed something was off before they even set foot on his property. Years of waking early and watching the land had turned him into more than just a farmer. He had become a guardian of all he held dear. Inside the house, the farmer sat upright in bed, the moonlight spilling through the window, illuminating gray hair strands on his weathered face. He had heard the soft sounds of movement outside, a rustle he couldn't ignore. It was like nature itself was whispering warnings, nudging him into action. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, feeling the hardened wooden floors beneath his feet. With slow resolve, he put on his boots, each thump echoing a promise. He wouldn't let anyone take what was his. Moving through the dimly lit corridors, he made his way to the kitchen, where the familiar clank of a well-worn coffee pot lightened the air. The smell of brewing coffee filled his senses, a comfort in stark contrast to the tension brewing outside. His heart thumped steadily, each beat echoing the intensity of the moment. He reached for a rifle that hung above the mantelpiece. It was an heirloom, once belonging to his father, imbued with stories of protection and resilience. He checked it. The feel of the wood against his hand was reassuring, grounding him as he approached the front window that looked out over the fields. The night was thick with shadows and whispers. He could almost hear the robbers' thoughts amplifying their confidence. "Just grab a few tools and slip away. Easy money," they would tell themselves. They thought they were clever, underestimating the man whose spirit ran as deep as the roots of the very crops he tended to. Near the barn, the men made their move. They crept through the tall grass, laughter mingling with uncertainty as they neared their target. Each time they glanced toward the farmhouse, they felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with fear, the kind that keeps your heart soaring and your mind racing. As they pushed open the barn door, it creaked like an old ghost warning them to leave. Inside, there were tools hung neatly on the walls, implements that were symbols of hard work and dedication. The tall robber stepped inside, grinning triumphantly. "Look at all this." But before they could even begin to fill their bags, the farmer stepped outside, rifle ready, his silhouette strong against the glow of the moon. "You picked the wrong place to steal from," he called out, his voice rumbling through the night air. Everything froze. The intruders turned, faces pale, disbelief written all over them. The taller one stammered, trying to recover bravado that quickly dissolved in the farmer's gaze. "This is my land." With a steady hand, he raised the rifle, a warning echoing through the barn and through the very core of their intentions. The wiry one's bravado began to waver. "We're not here to cause trouble," he blurted, taking a step back, eyes darting between the farmer and the exit. It was an instinctual response, fight or flight kicking in as fear clawed at their throats. But the tall robber scoffed, trying to regain control. "It's just some tools." He stepped forward, his heart racing with the realization that he had crossed into deeper waters. "Wrong choice," the farmer replied, voice steady and unyielding. He had faced many storms in life, both literal and metaphorical. That night was no different. "You think you can waltz in here and take what isn't yours?" In that moment, the farmer embodied years of struggle, the weight of long nights spent caring for crops, battling droughts and harsh winters. He stood as a wall against the impending chaos, a protector against the storm. The wiry thief, backing away slowly, glanced at his partner. He urged, sensing the tension coiling tighter around them like a snake ready to strike. But the tall robber hadn't heard the quiet plea. He was too busy trying to salvage his pride. "It's just a couple of tools, old man. We don't want any trouble," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction, the bravado fading like the last flicker of a candle. "Then walk away." The farmer leveled his gun, intensity sharpening the air around them. His eyes, fierce and unwavering, cut straight through the darkness, igniting a fear in the intruders they hadn't prepared for. In the silence that followed, time stood still. They were at a crossroads, fight or flight. The stakes had risen far beyond initiating a simple theft. The realization began to sink in this farmer was both an anchor and a hurricane. The tall robber urged once more, desperation creeping into his voice as he felt the weight of the choice forcing its way into the air between them. But the farmer shook his head, resolute. "I won't let anyone take what I've worked so hard for." The wiry robber's legs trembled as he turned to flee, firing up his fight or flight response. He urged again, determination returning to his voice as he moved toward the door. The tall robber, though torn, felt the impending disaster escalate. The audacity of their plan was unraveling with each tick of the clock. The stakes shifted, and with it, their confidence crumbled. They backed away, retreating into the shadows as quickly as they could. In one swift movement, they stumbled over each other, desperately clawing for the exit, leaving all thoughts of tools behind. Their bravado had evaporated, replaced by the stark survival instinct that kicked in as they glanced back at the farmer, his rifle still trained on them. The farmer called after them, voice strong and unyielding. Once outside, the robbers barely paused as they sprinted toward the relative safety of the road, hearts hammering like wild drummers as adrenaline coursed through their veins. They didn't dare look back. Their feet pounded against the ground like the frantic pounding of hearts. Breathless, they climbed into their getaway car, and just like that, the night returned to silence. The farmer stood rooted in place for a moment longer, the adrenaline fading but clarity sharpening. They hadn't just stolen tools, they had tried to plunder his identity, to drag him into their chaos. Once he was sure they were gone, the farmer lowered his rifle, a sigh slipping past his lips, a mix of relief and lingering tension. He hadn't wanted violence, he had wanted respect, a boundary drawn in the dirt. As he turned back toward the barn, the wind rustled through the grass, whispering ancient tales of courage and resilience. He walked among the tools now, each piece holding a memory of labor, sweat, and a fierce love for the land. The stakes had been high, but he had emerged unscathed, a guardian defending the very heart of his existence. In days that followed, he fortified his resolve. He put up better lighting, installed locks, and took the time to connect with his neighboring farmers, sharing his story over cups of coffee. There was something unifying about facing fear, together turning a quiet field into a vigilant community. When dusk fell once again, the farmer tended to his crops, hands deep in the rich earth as he felt the soil's heartbeat, a reminder of what was at stake. He was no longer just a man tending his land. He was a captain navigating turbulent waters, preparing for whatever storms lay ahead. He stood beneath the vast sky, watching as the sun painted the horizon in strokes of orange and pink, knowing that every sunrise brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to stand firm against the tide. He'd seen what fear could do, and he would not let it control him. Each night revealed the shadows anew, but he learned to embrace the darkness as a companion, a reminder to remain vigilant. He wasn't just protecting his farm, he was standing strong against any adversary that dared to encroach upon his peace. The whispers of the past would mingle with the winds of the present, igniting in him a fierce spirit of fortitude and determination. He was ready for what came next, ready to ensure that his legacy, like the roots of his crops, would thrive and bend, but never break. In this struggle between man and mischief, he had written a chapter one of countless nights under the moon, bound together by the simple understanding that home is worth fighting for. The night was thick with silence, but not the kind that brings peace. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, where every rustle of the wind felt like a whisper of danger. The moon hung low, casting silver beams across the sprawling fields of the Roberts family farm, where the corn swayed gently, unaware of the trouble that was creeping in. Somewhere in the shadows, two figures approached the farmhouse. They moved like ghosts, slipping effortlessly through the rows of crops. The first was tall and broad, exuding an air of misplaced confidence. The second was shorter, wiry, eyes darting around like a frightened rabbit. They were not thieves by trade, but desperation can turn anyone into a criminal. "Just a couple of tools and we're out," the taller one whispered, his voice tinged with excitement and a dash of fear. "Yeah, but keep it quiet." The wiry man trailed off, glancing over his shoulder. Fear rode close on their heels. Inside, the farmer, a man shaped by years of hardship and labor, tossed and turned in his sleep. The familiar creaks of the house echoed through his dreams, but something felt off. His instincts, finely tuned from years at the mercy of the land, kicked in. He sat up, wiping sleep from his eyes, his heart racing. He was not an old man. He was a protector of a legacy, someone who had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into this farm. He couldn't allow anyone to take what was his without a fight. The farmer reached for the rifle hanging above the door. It had seen countless seasons and countless fights, a bit rusty but still reliable. With steady hands, he checked it, knowing that this wasn't the first time he would need to defend his home. In fact, in the quiet of the night, he had prepared himself for this very moment. He slipped quietly through the hallway, the floorboards creaking softly under his boots. He paused at the window, glancing outside at the night sky, then at the fields where shadows danced in the pale moonlight. And there they were, two men by the barn. Their reckless movements gave them away. A rush of adrenaline surged through him as he caught their intentions, and a fierce determination lit a fire in his belly. They were about to make a grave mistake. With a deep breath, he turned towards the front door, the dim light from the lantern illuminating his path. He stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against his face, and walked towards the barn, his silhouette sharp against the moon. Each step felt like a drumbeat, a warning that echoed in the stillness. Inside the barn, the robbers rummaged carelessly through his belongings. The tall one grinned, holding up a pair of valuable tools that had been passed down through generations. "Look at these." But before they could even begin to fill their bags, the farmer's voice rang out, strong and unyielding. The intruders froze, the smile fading from the tall robber's face. The barn, once a place of secrets and solace, suddenly felt claustrophobic, a predator's den. Fear crept into the tall man's eyes, and a thin veil of sweat glistened on his forehead. We were just," the wiry one began, scrambling for an excuse, but the farmer didn't wait for their feeble attempts at justification. He stepped further into the light, rifle raised, every inch of him radiating authority. "This is my land," he declared. The rifle was steady, pointed with purpose, a bastion against their misguided intentions. The tall robber shifted nervously, trying to regain his bravado. "Come on, man, we don't want any trouble." But the farmer wasn't swayed. "Those aren't just tools, they're part of my life's work. You don't get to take what I've toiled for." His words were as sharp as the rifle's barrel, cutting deep into the half-hearted bravado of the intruders. For a moment, silence engulfed the barn. The tension hung thick in the air, a storm ready to break. The farmer's eyes, fierce and unwavering, were locked with the robbers, daring them to take a step further. At that moment, they hesitated. Fear began to worm its way into their decision-making, and the reality of their choices emerged from the shadows. They were not criminals worth their salt. They were scared men caught in the act, realizing the consequences of their folly. "Let's just walk away," the wiry one said, backing up slowly, trying to signal to his partner that retreat was the only option. For a second, the tall one hesitated, caught between fear and shame. But he was proud, too proud to let fear call the shots. "We're not leaving empty-handed," he snarled, unable to let go of his bravado entirely. The farmer tightened his grip on the rifle, breathing deeply. "You've come too far already." The power of his voice filled the barn, a command rooted in the strength of his decades of hard work. He wasn't just defending tools. He was defending his entire life, the legacy of generations of farming that had kept this land alive. Every piece of equipment represented years of sweat, late nights, and dreams of prosperity. He would never allow that to be stripped away because of two reckless men who had miscalculated their bravery. Then, surprisingly, it was the wiry robber who finally made the choice. "Forget it," he shouted, dashing toward the barn door, eyes wide with panic. But the tall one was still torn, wavering between his earlier bravado and the stark truth standing before him. The wiry one had escaped, and that should have been his cue. He called, panic rising in him as he realized the situation was shifting. It all happened in an instant. The wiry robber rushed past the farmer, who didn't flinch, standing his ground as if anchored to the very land he fought for. The tall robber, realizing he was now alone and his friend had made a break for it, felt his resolve crack. He shouted, his voice breaking as he lunged for the exit. They stumbled over each other in a frantic rush to escape, their bravado evaporating into thin air. The farmer lowered the rifle slightly, watching as they bolted for safety, emotions swirling within him. He hadn't wanted this. He'd wanted a peaceful life, one where trust reigned over fear. But thieves don't understand the heavy price of hard work. As they fled towards the darkened tree line, he called after them one last time. "You'll remember this. You'll think twice before coming back." With that, the farmer stood in the barn's doorway, the weight of his victory washing over him like a gentle tide. His heart pounded fiercely, but deep within, he felt an undeniable sense of fulfillment. He had defended more than just tools. He had stood against the kind of madness that took advantage of the hardworking. When the night quieted, he leaned against the barn, breathing in the cool air as dawn began to stretch across the horizon. The darkness began to retreat, welcoming the light. The first rays of sun kissed the horizon, burning bright orange and gold, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just occurred. The farmer knew he'd remain vigilant. He had already set plans into motion, fortifying not just his barn with locks but his spirit with resilience. He understood now more than ever that fear could either paralyze you or galvanize you. That night's confrontation had invited clarity into his world. It was better to be prepared than to be caught off guard. As he walked back into the house, he poured himself a cup of coffee, the warmth wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. He sipped thoughtfully, gazing out at the fields that would require his attention long after the sun had fully risen. Days turned into weeks, and as he tended to his crops, tales of the farmer's bravery spread through the small town. Neighbors began stopping by to share their own stories of confrontations, the world knitted together by threads of solidarity and resilience. Remembering that night reminded him of how important community was, and he began organizing gatherings, bringing people together to share not just the tales of their courage, but also the heartaches and triumphs of their lives. They laughed and cried together, bonded by the shared understanding that they were guardians of their own legacies. The farmer became a symbol of strength in the community, a reminder that standing tall against adversity could inspire others to do the same. His once quiet farm now echoed with laughter, neighbors fostering camaraderie beyond the shadows that had crept in. He even took extra precautions, better locks, security lights that flickered to life with the approach of any moving figure in the night, and conversations with local law enforcement, ensuring everyone looked out for each other. As the years passed, life on the farm continued, seasons changed and challenges arose, but the farmer had learned to embrace them. The encounters with thieves transformed into stories of strength that echoed through the community, each tale inspiring the next generation to stand firm against whatever life threw their way. And so in that quiet corner of the world, under those vast, unending skies, the farmer thrived, knowing he was more than just a steward of the land. He was a part of a greater whole, a continuing saga of resilience forged in the fires of struggle. Every sunset became a reminder of the battles he fought against the elements, against fear, and against those who would seek to take what wasn't theirs. He was more than just a farmer. He was a protector, a defender, and in that night's chaos he found his true calling anew. In the end, challenges would always arise, but so would the spirit to face them head-on, wherever they'd come from. And in that eternal dance between light and darkness, the farmer remained prepared, steadfast in his love for home, knowing full well that sometimes it takes a moment of panic to realize you have the strength to stand your ground. It was a quiet night on the Roberts family farm, the kind of night where the moon hung low and bright, casting a silver sheen over the crops. The corn stood tall and proud, swaying gently in the cool breeze, while crickets chirped their soft lullabies. But not all was peaceful on this seemingly ordinary evening. Somewhere beyond the glow of the farmhouse, two figures crept along the edge of the field, silhouettes moving cautiously but with a sense of purpose. The first was broad-shouldered and tall, his movements confident. The second was wiry and nervous, darting his eyes from side to side as if each sound could spell their end. They were two desperate men on a misguided quest, driven by greed rather than reasoning. "Tonight we're in for a big score," the tall one whispered, a crooked grin spreading across his face. "Just grab what we can and get out." "Yeah, but what if he catches us? That old farmer could be armed," the wiry one replied, his voice laced with anxiety. "No chance he's up this late, just stick to the plan." "We're in and out like shadows," said the tall one, puffing himself up with bravado. What they didn't know was that the farmer was far from oblivious. Inside the sturdy farmhouse, John Roberts, a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and hands worn from years of hard work, sat awake. He'd always been an early riser, and something about the unusual stillness of that night set off alarm bells in his gut. He shifted in his chair, pulling on a worn sweater that smelled of hay and earth. The radio played softly in the background, barely audible over the sound of his heartbeat echoing through the quiet room. He had grown up on this land, tending to crops since he was just a boy. Years of labor and sacrifice had forged an unbreakable bond between him and the farm. He wasn't about to let anyone take that from him. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of a barn door creaking shattered the tranquility outside. John's breath quickened, instincts kicking in. He peered through the window and saw the two intruders slipping inside, the moonlight revealing their intentions. His heart raced, but he didn't falter. With a determined stride, he turned toward the mantel where his rifle rested, a family heirloom passed down from father to son. It was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of protection, a measure of his promise to safeguard his home and livelihood. He grabbed it, feeling the cool wood in his hands, grounding himself in the moment. Outside, the robbers rummaged through the tools in the barn, their clumsy movements betraying their inexperience. The tall one looked up, spotting an old tractor. "This stuff is gold," he exclaimed, excitement bubbling over, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the walls. But the wiry one hesitated, looking around nervously. "Just be quiet." John moved stealthily toward the door, each step deliberate and calculated. He had lived through storms and droughts. This was just another challenge. He opened the door with a creak that seemed to echo into the night, and then he stepped into the barn, rifle raised. His voice boomed, rich and full of authority, cutting through the men's chatter like a knife. The tall robber spun around, mouth agape in shock, and for a moment they were frozen in time, just staring at each other. The taller one stammered, panic flickering across his face. "Just leaving," John interjected, stepping forward, his grip on the rifle unwavering. The wiry robber, wide-eyed, took a step back, sensing the danger in the farmer's voice. "We didn't mean any harm, man. Just thought we could grab a few tools." "We didn't think you'd," John interrupted, his resolve solid. In that moment, the air thickened with tension. John could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't just defending his property. He was protecting the memories etched into every corner of that barn, every tool, every piece of equipment that had helped him build a life. "Look," the tall robber tried to plead, raising his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. "We don't want any trouble," John echoed, voice steady. The wiry robber's hands trembled as he glanced at his partner, clearly unsettled. "We'll leave, just." John lowered his rifle slightly, realizing they were more scared than dangerous. But that didn't lessen the gravity of the situation. He needed them to understand. "You leave right now and I won't call the police. I'll let you go, but if you try anything else," the taller thief swallowed hard, glancing back at his partner, fear creeping in as he weighed his options. They hadn't expected this, and now the power was shifting. "Okay, okay," he shouted, stumbling towards the barn door. But before they could escape, John stood firm, his voice a rock against their chaos. "You've come this far without thinking." In that critical moment, fear gripped the robbers and overtook their bravado. The wiry one turned on his heel, dashing for the door like a rabbit fleeing a predator. The tall one followed, and together they burst from the barn into the night, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and fear. John watched them stumble away, their confidence evaporating into the chill of the evening air. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding, allowing the tension to drain from his body. Once their figures disappeared into the distance, he stepped back into the shadows of the barn. There, he let the rifle fall gently to his side, heart still pounding but steadied by the knowledge that he had defended not just his home, but the legacy of his family. As the sunrise began to paint the sky in hues of orange and gold, a wave of calm washed over him. He had stood his ground, faced down his fears, and emerged unscathed. But he understood that this was not the end. He would have to be vigilant. In days to come, he fortified his property. He installed better locks, improved the lighting that surrounded the barn, and even reached out to neighbors, sharing the story of what had occurred that night. His experience became a lesson not just for him, but for others who tended to their own lands. "They'll come for what they think is easy pickings," he told them, "but we must stand together to protect our homes." As the weeks turned into months, the farmers formed a small alliance, keeping an eye on one another's properties. They shared stories, laughter, and a bond forged in resilience. Fear no longer held them captive. Instead, it ignited a flame of community, a protective spirit that enhanced their lives. And through it all, John carried the memory of that night. He poured himself into his work, nurturing crops and cattle, while knowing that the fight for stability went beyond his land. It was about the people he loved and the community surrounding him. When dusk fell and the day's labor ended, he would sit on the porch, cradling a cup of coffee and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The stars began to peek through the inky sky, twinkling like distant dreams that were waiting to be achieved. Those stars reminded him that even in the darkest of nights, there was light, a glimmer of hope shining through the chaos. He had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, not just as a farmer, but as a defender of his way of life. Time rolled on and threats faded into stories shared over the seasons. Children played in the fields, laughter spilling into the air, filling the void that once contained fear. Families gathered for barbecues and festivities, each moment a celebration of community, resilience, and togetherness. Years later, one of the children, now a teenager, approached John one evening while he worked on his tractor. "You know, Grandpa always told stories about how you stood up to those robbers." John chuckled softly, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, kid." With those words swirling in the air, the boy gazed out over the fields. "You already are," John replied, an affectionate smile spreading across his face. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in breathtaking colors, and the boy nodded, contemplating the wise words. The farmer focused on the crops again, thankful that he hadn't just defended tools that night, but had fostered a culture of bravery for generations to come. In the end, the farmer was always ready, not just to fight against thieves who sought to disrupt his peace, but to stand tall for his family, his community, and the legacy that would endure as long as the land remained beneath his feet. The essential battles were never just fought with weapons. They were fought with resolve, love, and the courage to protect what truly matters. And as John watched the stars blink into existence, he felt the warmth of that truth envelop him like the embrace of a long-lost friend. The night was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence that wraps you in comfort. It was a silence filled with anticipation, as if the world was holding its breath. Under the pale moonlight, shadows loomed larger than life, and somewhere in the heart of that darkness, two miscreants crept forward, each step a reckless gamble. "Just a few tools," the taller of the two whispered, excitement edging his voice. His partner, a wiry figure with nervous energy radiating off him, glanced over his shoulder. "Are you sure about this? What if that old farmer catches us?" "Relax, he's just a farmer." The tall one grinned, pushing open the rickety door of the barn with a calculated bravado, unaware that inside those walls, someone was wide awake and waiting. Just a few miles away, Jake Thompson, the farmer, was fully alert, heart racing. He had sensed something off tonight. The crickets sang their usual tunes, but there was a lingering note of unease in the air. He'd spent his life on this land, nurturing every inch of it, and over the years, his instincts had sharpened, finely tuned to the slightest disturbances. Sitting up in bed, he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and slid on his boots. He moved quietly, a hunter prepared for what lay ahead. Reaching for the rifle that hung over the mantelpiece, a family heirloom passed down through generations, he felt a wave of determination wash over him. This was about more than mere tools. It was about protecting his life's work. With each creak of the floorboards, he made his way to the kitchen. The glow from the lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows around the room. He grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the barn, heart pounding in anticipation. Outside, the night wrapped tightly around him, cloaking his movements. As he approached the barn, he could hear their voices growing louder, filled with arrogance. They weren't the crafty criminals that movies portrayed. They were reckless and naive, thinking they could slip in and out before dawn broke. The tall robber rummaged through tools, prying open drawers and tossing items aside like they were worthless. "Look at this," he exclaimed, completely oblivious to the consequences of their actions. "Just be quiet," the wiry one hissed, glancing nervously toward the barn door. Jake stood at a distance, watching the scene unfold, muscles coiled like a tightly wound spring. The sight of those strangers invading his sanctuary ignited something deep within him. He stepped closer, ready to confront them, knowing that this was his moment. With a burst of courage, he strode into the barn, rifle poised, casting the beam of his flashlight straight at the intruders, illuminating the panic on their faces. His voice sliced through the barn's chatter like a hot knife through butter, rich and authoritative. The robbers froze, their confidence instantly replaced by shock. The tall one gaped at the farmer, trying to find his voice. Jake interjected, stepping further into the barn, every word steady and deliberate. Panic flickered in the tall one's eyes, and he desperately tried to regain control. "Come on, man. We didn't want any trouble." Jake's voice was low, and the power behind it echoed through the barn. There was no way he was letting them get away with it. At that moment, the wiry robber's fear morphed into a more primal instinct. He shouted, turning to dart for the door, but the tall one hesitated, glancing back at his partner. "Wait," he called, trying to keep his partner from bolting into the night. Fear ignited adrenaline within Jake. "You're on my land, and I won't let you take anything from me," he warned, taking a step forward, rifle steady. Sweat trickled down the tall robber's brow as he glanced nervously between Jake and the tools scattered around him. "We didn't think you'd be home," Jake thundered, his heart pounding in tandem with the weight of every word. "Those tools represent years of hard work, blood, and sweat." The tension in the barn reached a boiling point. Jake could see the wiry one shifting uncomfortably, eyeing the door as if the exit could somehow save them. The tall one, sensing his partner's fear, finally came to a choice, albeit a desperate one. Okay, he pleaded. Jake's grip tightened on the rifle. "You'd better run." With that stern warning echoing in the air, the robbers made their escape. They stumbled over their own feet as they barreled out of the barn, panic overtaking them, leaving the scattered tools and their sense of bravado behind. Jake watched as they dashed into the darkness, their figures fading into the night. He held his breath, heart racing, finally letting the adrenaline fade. He He hadn't wanted violence, but he recognized this was a stand he couldn't avoid. Once the barn was quiet, he lowered the rifle, staring out into the night, the gravity of the encounter weighing heavily. He defended more than just his tools. He defended his legacy, the life he'd built with hard work and love. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in beautiful shades of pink and orange, he began to process what had happened. He understood that he could no longer take the safety of his home for granted. It wasn't just about precocious thieves. It was about his family, his friends, and everything he valued. In the days that followed, the incident weighed on him. He took proactive steps to strengthen his sense of security. He installed new locks, improved the lights around the barn and farmhouse, and made it a point to talk to his neighbors. "Those kids are out here looking for an easy score," he told them. They nodded, sympathetic, sharing their own stories of close calls and near misses. The community was small, and tales of mischief were not uncommon. It was a reminder that they must remain vigilant together. Gradually, his farm became a hub of camaraderie. On weekends, neighbors gathered, sharing stories on the porch, laughter ringing out, a clear testament to their resilience. They became allies, and Jake felt a sense of belonging deepen with every conversation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, illuminating the fields like molten gold, an old friend stopped by. "You know, what you did that night took guts," his friend said, pouring a glass of lemonade. Jake shrugged, glancing out over the fields, the crops swaying gently in the breeze. "I didn't have a choice." As the days passed, he reflected on that night more often, understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the move to stand firm despite it. Each night as he settled into bed, he felt the lingering pulse of that encounter, an unshakable reminder that vulnerability exists, even in the safest of places. The season rolled on, and harvest time approached, bringing an air of hope and anticipation. The farm became a whirlwind of activity, neighbors banding together to help collect the crops, laughter echoing through the rows of golden corn. The sense of community washed over him like a comforting wave, each smile a reassuring reminder of their bonds. But even with the buoyant air around him, Jake remained cautious. The memory of the robbery had left an indelible mark. When night fell, he could still hear the echoes of that confrontation, and while he took comfort in the camaraderie they had built, he also held a newfound respect for vigilance. The harvest progressed, the smell of fresh earth mingling with the scent of hard work, and through it all, the sense of unity grew stronger. The farmers' market days became a staple of life, not just for selling crops but for sharing stories, laughter, and the occasional scare that came with living on the land. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead like diamonds strewn across velvet, a group of children from the neighborhood gathered on his porch, recounting stories of their own adventures. Their faces lit up with delight, innocence shining brightly in the night. And then one child, eyes wide, asked. Mr. Jake chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "I did." Their interest piqued, the kids leaned in closer. "I stood my ground," he explained, watching their eyes drink in every word. As they listened, Jake realized he was passing down more than just a story. He was instilling courage in the next generation. He wanted them to know that bravery isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments of resolve. The days rolled into weeks, and with each sunrise, the lessons of that one fateful night echoed more clearly in his heart. The hustle and bustle of farm life continued, the planting, the tending, the harvesting. And as autumn settled in, Jake felt content, ready to embrace whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, whispers of break-ins echoed less frequently, and the community felt safer. People remained vigilant, banding together with a shared goal to protect their homes. One crisp morning, while tending to his crops, Jake noticed a figure in the distance, a familiar silhouette rushing toward him. It was one of the neighborhood kids, breathless with excitement. "Mr. Thompson, you won't believe it," the child exclaimed. Jake asked, curiosity piqued. "The robbers." Wide-eyed, the boy relayed an encounter that sent a chill down Jake's spine. His heart raced. "Yeah, but Timmy's dad scared them off too." The child beamed with pride. In that moment, Jake felt a rush of both fear and relief. "Good. As the sun set that evening, a sense of solidarity enveloped him. The neighborhood stood together, armed not just with physical means, but with the understanding of the strength found in community. They began to hold regular meetings to discuss safety, pooling resources and sharing stories that bound them closer together. Jake stood up during one of those meetings, heart full, as he looked around the room filled with familiar faces. "We've all shared our stories, our struggles. Let's keep each other safe." Cheers went up, and as the camaraderie blossomed, he realized that while that encounter had been scary, it had also sparked a fire within the community, igniting a collective spirit that would endure through every challenge. And so the seasons changed, and with each passing day, the bonds they had nurtured grew stronger. As autumn rolled into winter, the fields lay dormant under a blanket of snow, but the warmth of friendship kept the fires burning bright in their hearts. Many nights were spent exchanging stories by the fireplace, laughter filling the air as they recounted tales of bravery and mischief, both small and large. Jake found himself surrounded by people who had become family, all rising together to face whatever life threw their way. Life on the farm became a tapestry woven with resilience, heart, and unity. Each sunrise brought new opportunities, new challenges, and above all, new stories to share. Fear was still a companion from time to time, but it no longer dictated their actions. Years later, when young faces gathered once more on his porch, eager to hear about the day he stood his ground, Jake told the story with pride not just for himself, but for the community that had grown around him. The legacy he had built extended far beyond the fields. It became a tale of courage passed down through generations. And every sunset was a reminder that as long as they stood together, they were ready for whatever shadows might come creeping in. The farm wasn't just a piece of land. It was a sanctuary where strength was born, a testament to the power of standing firm against adversity, and a legacy that would live on for years to come. The night was thick and heavy, the kind that seemed to swallow sound and light, surrounding everything with a foreboding hush. Underneath the blanket of stars, a lone farmhouse stood resolute, its wooden frame holding stories of toil and triumph. But tonight, a different story was about to unfold. In the moonlight, two figures crept forward, their shadows blending into the inky darkness as they approached the farm. They had done their homework, and it seemed too easy. An unsuspecting farmer solo, nestled in a world of his own, ripe for the picking. Whispered the shorter one, his voice quaking with fear. "He's just a farmer." The tall one scoffed, confidence dripping from his words as they pushed the barn door ajar, the creak echoing like a warning bell through the peaceful night. Little did they know, just beyond that rickety door, a guardian lay awake, waiting for a sign, a stir of wind, a flicker of movement. Mark Thompson, the farmer, had grown accustomed to late nights spent under the stars, but tonight felt different. He could feel the stillness permeating the air like a prelude to chaos. Driven by instinct, he rolled out of bed, the wooden floor cool against his feet. He flicked on a small lamp, its glow casting long shadows across the room. In the corner, the rifle leaned against the wall, a silent promise of protection that had been passed down through generations. He picked it up, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. Years of hard work etched into every part of its wood grain, memories of storms weathered and nights spent under the same stars blinking down at him. It was time to act. Peering out through the window, Mark squinted into the gloom, the barn standing watchful in the distance. That's when he saw them, the two robbers, furtively rummaging through his tools, carelessly tossing aside years of labor like they were nothing. The tall robber hoisted up a prized tool, a vintage plow knife that had been in Mark's family for generations. "Look at this," he gloated, laughter bubbling over as he tossed it to the wiry robber. The shorter one stammered, glancing back nervously. Mark felt a surge of anger. Those tools represented more than just wood and metal. They were years of sweat and sacrifice. Time to make his presence known. With determination coursing through him, he opened the door, stepping silently into the night, the rifle tucked firmly against his shoulder. He called, voice steady, devoid of fear. The robbers froze, their expressions morphing from amusement to disbelief as they spun around to face him. The tall robber's bravado faltered. Mark interrupted, stepping forward, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness and landing squarely on them. A murmur raced through the air, the tension thick enough to slice. The tall one hesitated, a flicker of panic igniting in his eyes while the wiry one moved to bolt for the door, but Mark was quick. "You won't get very far." The taller robber whined, hands awkwardly raised, a feeble attempt to calm the storm brewing. Mark shot back, each word dripping with intensity. "That you could come into my home and take what's mine." Real fear dawned over the two robbers. They weren't prepared for a confrontation. Mark was no ordinary farmer. He was a man hardened by years of struggle and survival. As the taller robber stepped back, glancing at his partner, Mark saw the uncertainty wash over them. "Let's just leave, man. We didn't know." The wiry one pleaded, looking for any escape route. "Not before you drop that knife," Mark commanded, voice unwavering, rifle still steady in his grip. The short robber's hand trembled as he looked down at the small blade clenched tight in his fist. "Come on, Tony, let's just get out of here," the wiry robber said, taking a step closer to the door, fear flooding his voice. Mark stepped closer, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the roguish faces of the intruders. "You will leave the way you came." That's when the tall robber, fueled by adrenaline and a floundering sense of pride, lunged forward. He shouted, attempting to dodge past Mark. But the moment he moved, Mark acted. With a swift motion, he raised the rifle, the sound of the cocking mechanism echoing like a gunshot through the barn. The fierce edge to Mark's voice cut through the dark air, reverberating in the very core of the intruders. The tall robber froze, eyes wide with realization. He blurted, breath hitching in his throat. "I'll make sure you never come back to this farm," Mark said, the weight of his words heavy and frightening. The wiry thief looked at his partner, fear etched on his face, trembling. "Let's just leave." In that instant, the power dynamics shifted completely. The robbers had entered with the thrill of bravado, but now fear painted their expressions. They were cornered, a fact they couldn't escape. "Just go, run. And if I ever see either of you here again, I won't hesitate," Mark warned, the conviction in his voice unwavering, the rifle aimed squarely at their hearts. Resolutely, the wiry robber turned, fear propelling him toward the barn door. The tall one hesitated, still caught in that frantic web of pride and panic. The wiry one urged, desperate to escape. With one last look at the old farmer who now held the power in his hands, the tall robber bolted for the exit. In a flurry of movement, they both dived into the night, shadows swallowed by the darkness. Mark stood still, pulse thundering in his ears, heart racing from the rush of adrenaline. He hadn't wanted this confrontation, but he had stood firm for what he loved. The power of protecting one's home surged through him, satiating a primal instinct that demanded respect. As the sun began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, relief washed over him. He lowered the rifle, stepping back from the doorway, taking in the calm of the morning. He had defended not just tools, but a legacy, a life built on sweat and determination. But as he turned to head back inside, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Off in the distance, hidden behind a thick cluster of trees, a dark figure lingering just long enough to catch his breath. It was the tall robber watching from afar, eyes shining with an unsettling hunger. In that chilling moment, Mark felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. This was not over. The encounter had escalated, and he sensed that they would come back, emboldened by their failure but determined not to leave empty-handed. He rushed back inside, adrenaline reigniting as he locked the door and made sure every window was secured. The predator and prey relationship had shifted, and the calm he had felt was now clouded by uncertainty. That night, sleep eluded him. Every creak of the house echoed through the silence, twisting his stomach in knots. The world outside, once peaceful, now felt like a battleground. The thrill of the encounter had quenched the initial fears, but now a storm brewed in his chest, churning restlessly. How would he protect his home if the robbers returned? How far would they go? As dawn broke the next day, it brought no answer, only lingering shadows of doubt. Mark stepped outside, fidgeting with his rifle strap, scanning the edges of the horizon for movement, each rustle in the wind sending a fresh jolt of anxiety through him. Days turned into weeks, and although life continued on the farm under the weary sun, a tension hung like clouds before a storm. Mark fortified windows, set up lights, and spoke with neighbors, sharing stories and advice on how to stay vigilant. But there was a heaviness, an undeniable worry that seeped into each sunrise. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm, that the robbers would strike back, emboldened and more reckless than before. Then one fateful night, while checking around the property, the hairs on the back of Mark's neck bristled, an instinctual sense of dread. The air felt electric, as if the night itself was alive, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a noise broke the stillness, a car engine rumbling low in the distance. Heart pounding, he turned back toward the farmhouse, watching as headlights pierced through the darkness, inching closer. With a rushing pulse, he grabbed the rifle, reloading it with trembling hands as he ducked behind a stack of hay bales. The light flickered closer, illuminating the outline of a familiar vehicle. Mark's stomach dropped as he recognized it, the getaway car from the night of the robbery. His breath quickened, blood racing through his veins as the headlights turned off, plunging the farm into darkness once more. Silhouetted figures spilled from the car, laughter mingling with the night air, echoes of bravado and mischief. They were back. Mark peered through the gap, heart thumping wildly. The robbers strolled toward the barn, emboldened by the safety of numbers, confident in their collective bravado. They had returned, and he could feel the tension hanging thick in the air, a suffocating blanket of fear and anger. He gripped the rifle tightly, feeling the weight of his responsibility crushing down on him. This wasn't just about tools anymore. It was about defending everything he cherished. Every instinct screamed for him to act, to leap into action, but he knew he had to be smart. He needed the element of surprise. As the robbers slipped into the barn, Mark's mind raced. What was his next move? He felt that old wave of determination surge again, mingling with the dread. This was going to escalate. He couldn't let them rack up another attempt. With one last deep breath, he steeled himself. It was time to face the storm head-on. With purpose in every step, he climbed from behind the hay bales, rifle raised, resolve set. But as he approached the barn door, the laughter echoed and adrenaline pushed him forward. He could hear snippets of their conversation, revealing plans that dug deeper than petty theft. This time, we'll show him. Mark's heart raced, understanding now more than ever that this moment would define him, not just as a farmer but as a protector, a sentinel who would not let fear control his life. As he flung open the barn door, the laughter halted abruptly, silence consuming the room. And in that heartbeat, Mark stepped into the threshold, ready for whatever lay ahead, prepared to defend not just his farm, but everything he held dear. The confrontation was moments away, and uncertainty swirled in the air thick as fog. Would the robbers come for him again, or would he finally show them the true meaning of resilience? In the silence of that night, a powerful turning point loomed, ready to unfold.